Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 485th New Social Environment. I'm Ty, the Senior Production Assistant here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Julia Rommel and David Rhodes. We are thrilled to welcome the poet Ellie Parker here, who will read to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges that Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you all to check out the chat in just a moment for a living document of resources and actions. And now to introduce today's guest and host, artist Julia Rommel is an American painter with a strong interest in the art historical canon. In her paintings, Rommel is less interested in signature brushstrokes than in what she describes as using tools to keep my signature away. Her paintings act equally as research into color. While they are not attempts at color harmonies, the artist is interested in the conflict between colors and of using tone to eliminate one another. Rommel's work acts between painting and relief, insisting on the objectiveness of the work. And New York-based artist and writer David Rhodes is originally from Manchester, UK. He is an editor-at-large at the Brooklyn Rail and has published reviews in Artforum and Artcritical, among other publications. He has paintings in the permanent collections of the Museum of Fine Arts Houston and the Huntington Museum Los Angeles. He published a book on Bernard Frize in 2019, part of the Lund Humphries series on contemporary painting, edited by Barry Schwabsky. And you can take it away, David.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome, Julia. I've not long got back from seeing your exhibition this morning. Congratulations, great show. I wanted to begin by asking you how this particular installation of works came about. I know it contrasts with your last exhibition at Bureau, and I'm curious to know how you worked with the space itself, because that seems a very conscious installation of works to somehow incorporate the viewer's experience of moving through the space. And I'd like to thank Michael for meeting me at the gallery. And actually he did mention that the more monochrome works in this exhibition recall some of the works from your first exhibition with Bureau in Chinatown in, I think, 2014. Mm-hmm. I wonder if you could say something about this combination of works with the space.
Of course. Yeah, that's a nice observation, and I have a lot that I could say about that. And it's really interesting to bring up my very first show at Bureau, which was in the much smaller space on Henry Street, where I, in that show, was thinking so much about the space of the gallery, because it was so specific. It was quite like closet sized. So making these small monochromes, and I made a lot more paintings than were needed in the show and just moved them around for 5 days to see what worked best in that room. And since then, in my shows in this current space at Bureau and in the shift of how I make paintings, I definitely got away from that installation-based approach where, say with my last show at Bureau, just trying to make like each painting kind of like the most grand painting it could be, and then just having these big paintings that I sort of had to react to in the space. So with this show, it started not with being like, oh, I have this concept which is going to be thinking more about the gallery space. It kind of started with a frustration with trying to make paintings in a whole new way that was like setting up this very structured system, kind of a process that I felt had a lot of rules and I was hoping would create paintings in a way that surprised me again. But just kind of being pushed back into a place where I was before of having to like layer after layer fix those paintings, and kind of seeing them start to return to sort of like the paintings I'd made for the last show, which I didn't want to happen, and just having these great big paintings that I would then try to make work in the gallery. So it was actually my artist friend, Matthew Cerletti, who really pushed me to think about the space of Bureau and to think about kind of like how I had been working previously. So I did, and I started, I building a digital mock-up of the gallery, and really like walking around the space and seeing how the horizontality of those, what we have kind of like these like long horizontal walls that like a more medium-sized horizontal painting was called for on a lot of these walls. And it kind of opened up for me from there, where I was sort of thinking about the relationship as opposed to like thinking about each individual painting as this like trying to force a masterpiece out of each individual painting. So in a way, it was very freeing for me.
Mm-hmm. What's the experience of working on different scales like for you? Because the larger works incorporate beginnings, it seems, that could go either way. They could become discrete works in themselves, or they could become additional and constitute a larger work. So when you're working on a small painting, is it clear that do you have any prior idea that you're going to make a small painting, or do the small paintings kind of appear through the process, through the experience of making?
Right. I mean, sometimes I have prior ideas about things, but my ideas never pan out to be what I what I expect. I mostly have ideas about what a big painting should be. And before this show, it was kind of exclusively ideas about what I wanted out of a big painting. And the small paintings would often be sort of like edited crops of the from attempts at big paintings. So if a big painting wasn't working out, I'd maybe divide it into quarters or take a little corner of it and be like, oh, I see a small painting in here that's working. And that never really happened with medium-sized paintings, where I would be able to find a medium-sized painting. And by medium-sized, I know that's like a very fluid term, but I mean something like between like 30 by 40, 40 by 50 inches. I always was planning out my medium-sized paintings kind of similar to the big ones, and they were always harder for me. So I think previous to this show, I've had very few medium-sized paintings, and it was that the small ones were kind of these like later revisions of parts of the big paintings. Yeah, it's very rare that I'll have a like a specific concept for a small painting and set out from the beginning to paint a small painting, but I think it will happen. I think it will happen for my next show, because I think I want to think about my next show in the same way of like really deliberately choosing proportions based on the gallery space.
Is there often a dialogue between exhibitions, groups of works? Do you feel there's something is partially concluded at the end of one exhibition that inspires you or gives you direction in the next group of works? Or is it more of a, are these works, I mean, presumably you're working on numerous works at the same time and they feed into each other. But is there a kind of pause? Do you feel there's a sense that after each exhibition there's a reassessment for you?
Well, I'm really slow. Like I'm really slow, both in the making of my work, but also in the processing of, say, like how I feel about an exhibition, or what should change based on my reaction to a show, in any way that feels like kind of like an immediate shift from one show to the next. I think it happens more in big chunks of years for me, where I will have an immediate reaction to a show and I'll go into the studio and I'll say, well, I don't know, just like as an example, like if one show, you know, had a lot of muted colors and a lot of gesture, okay, maybe I should try, you know, these few specific ideas for my next show. But then like I kind of will probably continue to bring up any kind of immediate idea I have like that tends to get totally like thwarted and covered up in the process of making these paintings, especially with my shows previous to this one, previous to Uncle, where like layer after layer of creating the paintings, they just kind of took on a direction of their own. So pushing my shows in any one direction or another based on a reaction to a previous show kind of feels like something that is too big for me. So I do feel like this show is different in how we've discussed, in that I could sort of have returned to a more installation-based approach, and the paintings are different on account of that. But it's after a year, and I think the pandemic had a lot to do with it, where I had this time. I didn't have a show at all last year in 2021. So I knew I had to change things, not necessarily because of my last show, but because of how I was feeling in the studio, which wasn't great. So I had a feeling of frustration and that things needed to change, but it took a full year of trying to like push through ideas of how this show could be totally different, really failing in a big way at like making these paintings that conform to a specific idea of how it should be different. And then finally in the end, having that surprise of having fun and feeling more free and making these paintings in a new way. It was just a surprising way that it happened.
Sure. Did you make these paintings in New York?
I did, yeah, in my studio in Gowanus.
So I think you've spent some time in Los Angeles working recently. Was that 2020, or were you there during the pandemic, or were you here?
I was in LA. I went there January of 2020, and I stayed there for 4 months. So I was there for the first. It's actually there for the first month of the pandemic, and then I came back to New York just to make sure I could enjoy the pandemic with you all.
Right.
But LA was yeah, LA was a question in it. Like I made drawings for 4 months when I was there, and I was thinking about the show that I had before Uncle, which was a show in LA at Overdune & Co. And that was kind of like it was a whole different show, and that I made these drawings in LA, and then I sort of tried to make paintings based on the drawings. It was another sort of like idea that got twisted, where I knew I wanted to make a different kind of show, and I like set myself up in this structured way. But it didn't translate directly to like making drawings and then making paintings from the drawings. I was impacted by the fact that I was in LA, but I made the paintings back in New York, and I think it was a scattering of old ideas, new ideas, and kind of like the drawings as well.
Do you find that, I can imagine in your studio with the amount of material and the length of the process of making the paintings, it's kind of its own world. Do you find that being in different locations or travel, does that, do those experiences come into the studio? I guess they must do, but I'm just wondering, because of, for one thing, the anecdotal nature of some of your titles, they seem to be markers of actual experiences. And I wonder what the relationship is between that studio world and, you know, a social, geographic experience. So when you're talking about the way the paintings are going, the layered nature of them and the surprises, is that something you've discovered in making the paintings, or is it a way to reflect experience outside the studio? I mean, is it a kind of conscious subject, or do you just find that the paintings contain experience that's analogous, or it's in a way a flow, it's continuous, it's whatever your experiences are in the world at large tend to reappear, or they're just naturally part of what you discover in the paintings, or they reflect, the paintings reflect something back to you that brings something to consciousness. I'm not sure how to describe it, but there must be a connection there that's that you make, that you connect with some of the titles, for example.
Right, and I think that the way you were just kind of meandering through a description is actually pretty accurate, and yeah, it's hard to I'm never quite sure what's true when it comes to color and the impact of our life experiences, what we take in. But I certainly know that whenever I kind of like consciously set about to be like, oh, like I just spent an hour staring at the ocean, so I'm going to go paint ocean colors, like that never works out. But I do find these like kind of like consistent color stories appearing kind of throughout my work for a really long time. And I sort of, I let myself, and I do think it's true, like that it can be attributed to experiences in cities or in landscapes that have had a really kind of profound impact on me. I mean, I grew up in kind of like a swampy marshland on the eastern shore of Maryland. A lot of water, a lot of like muted like greens and browns, and I love that landscape. And a lot of those colors appear in my paintings, to the point where I'm kind of consciously sort of stepping away from them when I find them in my paint. Like I'm kind of, for this show, wanted to go with bolder colors. But I so often land on those muted greens. Then say the small painting in this show, like the small kind of like splashy painting with purple and green. I don't know, we were just on an install shot of that image. I don't know if it can be brought up again, but I spent a month in Maine this last summer. Actually not that one, it's the smaller one, but that one works too. I spent a month in Maine this past summer, and then I had a residency in Maine at a place called Surf Point the year before. And that landscape is so stunning to me. And a lot of the paintings in this show, that one, yeah. Which I wanted even to title something more direct, like Maine House, but I sort of like wimped out and was a little more passive about my title. But that one very much reminds me of my experience of being on the coast of Maine, and was totally unintentional in the process of making it. So that's sort of a long answer to your question of the impact from the outside. I just kind of embrace it when I see it. But I've given up on sort of like trying to consciously incorporate it.
I wanted to ask you about the edges in your paintings, because especially these days when we're viewing a lot of work on Instagram or generally on a computer screen, it's true to say that all painting needs to be seen face to face, and that there's something random about the representation of paintings across the media. But in particular, because of the materiality of your paintings and the way in which you engage with the stretcher, it's important to move, to be moving across the painting and looking at the edges, and they have a life of their own. It's a three-dimensional object, but a very particular. It's not a three-dimensional object like a sculpture. It's and it's not making a fetish of painting as object, but there's a very poetic relationship between the need to encounter the painting frontally, and then realize that it has the life on its edges. And in some of the paintings in Uncle, the current show, I'm thinking of a red painting. Is it called Red Nude? Or
Yes.
and I feel this about some of the other paintings too. The nature of the monochrome and the way in which the surface, I think, it's been heavily gessoed. It's a very resistant surface, and it features some very particular seams that are raised. So it has a modulation across the surface, but it, in some ways, encourages the examination of the edge. The painting deflects in a way. There's the engagement with that gorgeous color, and then at the edge that something else happens. So I'm thinking in contrast to some of the exhibitions in your last show at Bureau, or some of your other previous exhibitions, where there's some sort of feeling of a window. There's a way in which the space moves into the painting. In these paintings, the space sometimes is moved out to the edge. It feels a little like that's part of the experience. That seems very different.
That's a really, it's a really interesting observation. And I think you're picking up on a difference in the process of making, specifically this painting, but a couple of other paintings in the show, the green one of left field, and I guess, first of all, I'm really glad that you think it is important to see them in the physical space and to like encounter the edges first when the as moving around the gallery, because I do take that into account and take that seriously. And it is always kind of a bummer that so often they're seen just straight on the screen. But and like one more thing I want to say just to that is that the thing I do and what has worked for me is that the edges are always stapled or attached to stretcher bars or wrapped around them in kind of the most practical and simple way possible. Like there's never a staple there that's not necessary. And that's like, I don't have too many rules, but that's sort of a rule for me where like, there will be no like decorative element to the edges that I impose upon it. It's really just like, I have to stretch that red gesso thing as tight as possible. And therefore I need the staples like on the sides and I need them on the back. So that's how I kind of like let the edges happen. And you know, in ways where having the paint continue onto the edges is there's a sort of strange kind of like vulnerability to it in a way. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to talk about what you were bringing up about the difference between kind of the window-like quality of the last show and the more kind of, I don't know what it is, just maybe confrontational quality of these paintings. And it relates to my my original idea in making this show, which I did like fully carry out. The paintings just became something totally different than I expected. I had someone fabricate these big plywood cubes and columns for me. And I, instead of using my kind of like original starting point of stretching linen around stretcher bars and gessoing them and then unstretching them, instead I stretched most of the linen for the paintings in this show around these cubes and columns. So like much more, and I do have, I don't know if it's, if we're ready to go there now, but I do have like studio shots of this process.
Maybe we could see them.
We could. Yeah. So it's, I'm not sure how like intuitive it is what you're seeing here, but it's like a plywood cube. Stretch the linen around it like it's a present, and then just gessoing the exposed areas. And then my original idea was to totally just like paint the cubes while they were, paint the linen while it was still wrapped around the cube, open it up and be like, okay, what like exciting surprises do I have here from what I see and what I don't see? And the answer was like, I wasn't very excited by those surprises. It just didn't there was a lot wrong with what I was seeing there. And that's when I started kind of like layering up those paintings and trying to kind of like push them back into the more like compositionally intricate paintings that I was making before this show. But through kind of like a lot of cutting up and throwing things away and destroying stuff that had too much paint on it, I did get to a point where I was treating these surfaces, once they were stable to the wall, pretty in a pretty like cavalier way. Like, okay, these were failures, whatever can happen to them. And that's how I got to that red painting, which is like, that was more of a column, which is why you just see those rows, but the ridges are from the corner of the box. So you're seeing like, that was a cube or a column, a rectangle. So, which I painted on the wall, like the oil paint was applied with the gesso part on the wall. But that's why you're seeing something kind of different in the window. I think it's because it was this really kind of like bulky physical object at one point.
Right. I was going to ask you about Lifeboat, that particular painting, which uses some of the triangular shapes that we see here. Did I read that you use some of the shapes from the LA drawings, the work on vellum that you made? Did you use some of those shapes in this particular painting? And do these triangular shapes have an association? Do they, they seem kind of building-like, or there's an emblematic feel to them? Is that something that you've used deliberately, or that came up through the drawings you made? Are those drawings in LA now in some way being incorporated, some of the shapes or experience of making them? Are they now in paintings, would you say?
I think some of those shapes are in paintings, but to be honest, I haven't been looking at those drawings directly in relation to this show. I think that I think it's like similar to the colors and how unconsciously certain shapes just keep reappearing. In LA, I was having so many questions about like the idea of home and like the structures that are your home, and I'm not sure. I don't know what's true, but I do feel like I just kept making these drawings that look like little houses or that look like mountains. And I was like, is it because I'm sort of in a home away from home? I don't know. And then I was still kind of very much thinking about that and trying to like sort of, I did make a couple paintings for the LA show that worked out, that came more directly from the drawings. Since then, I haven't been thinking about those drawings so much, but I think that I just love triangles. And for whatever reason, whether it's those emotional kind of connections or I mean, these triangles in this painting, what you're seeing is actually a piece of linen that came off of those boxes. So the triangles, I mean, it is like way more practical than, or it's like, how much does my consciousness come in? It's hard to say. The triangles were being made by the boxes. I mean, of course, I was very much aware they were being made. But I was suffering through Actually, can we go to, I included studio shots of this painting in progress. If we can go to those studio shots, that would be good. Because this painting was kind of like suffering through working on the front of this piece of linen. What you're seeing now is the back, and just like layer after layer, not making this painting work. I eventually flipped the piece of linen over, saw that a lot of interesting things were happening on the back. I had this other kind of failure of a painting in which I was like just making this sort of like way too refined and elegant. This one is also a result of the column structures, the middle painting there. So what we have is like two failed paintings. The one is cut apart and put on the other side of the other painting. And I was just like, oh, I can change the color of those triangles and cut everything up again and make one painting that might work together compositionally from this. And that's the more, this is when it's on my wall in the studio, I'd kind of patched it together and repainted those triangles. And that's sort of all I did. But this making this painting was kind of a turning point for me in thinking about the show, because it was kind of the beginning of seeing that all of my failures from the year could be used in a way. They just sort of had to be used in a way that I wasn't expecting, like in a way that was a bit more open to collage and not fussing with paint and not like layering paint a ton.
Yeah, I know you've talked about admiring Blinky Palermo and Raul de Queza for their lack of fussiness. Mm-hmm. And there's a gorgeous coming together of some sort of dislocation in the surface, as in this painting, often in other paintings, where you've reversed the linen to expose its raw quality, as it comes, and it's immediately next to heavily gessoed and carefully painted linen, and the two things are such a surprise, but they work together. There's not a sense of arbitrariness. That they absolutely belong together once they've come together. There's definitely that feeling that you're very open to the way the material comes together. And I wanted to ask you, while we're looking at this painting and talking about how it was composed or constructed, how did you discover this as a way of making paintings? It seems very uncontrived. I think I've read that you discovered by accident, whilst working on one painting, that when you unstretched it, it actually worked. Or that once you were aware of the part of the painting that was wrapped around the stretcher bar, once that was exposed, the painting was successful, or it was interesting, surprising to you. Was it difficult to move from that kind of happenstance to working with it as an established way of working? Because it still feels very uncontrived, but I would imagine it's very difficult to go from something discovered by accident
Mhm.
that's very surprising and complete, to using it, to incorporating it into a way of working where you repeat very differently that discovery.
Right. Yes, I think it is really hard to like return to that really exciting original surprise I had, which isn't overly complicated, but it was another period of early frustration in my studio. I mean, this is in like 2010, 2011, so 15 or more than that, or sorry, less than that, but more than 10 years ago. But I didn't know how I wanted to paint, and I was making these tiny black monochromes, and I wasn't even sure. I was just kind of having fun. I wasn't even sure if they would be paintings I would put out in the world, but I think I unstretched one of them just to kind of reclaim the little stretcher bars that were on them, and seeing all those folds and creases and the raw linen when I unstretched it kind of yeah, opened up this kind of like mark making possibility and composition that I wouldn't have ever created myself. And I've tried to kind of keep that element of the unknown going by, I think how have done that throughout the years in a way has been by like, okay, let's add color, let's make it bigger, let's add more, which worked for a while because I was like, everything felt like its own new experiment. Like, oh, if they can be medium sized, can they be really big? And yeah, like what compositional elements can happen. But I do think it got to a point, and it's like another difference between my last show and this show, where I was like, I can't, they're too complicated. I can't just keep adding to add an element of surprise. Like reaching a point a couple years ago, and I was like, actually, I have to go back to simplicity for the sake of the paintings. That's why I think the year was so hard for me, because I wasn't finding anything. But I don't know, like this painting really like opened up like my mind around stuff that was in the studio. But I do think other paintings in the show, like the red one or the more monochromatic ones, sort of a different way of thinking that was letting my gesture in, and like sort of totally conscious in a way, like putting paint on in a conscious way that's unexpected and different for me. Like there was kind of in a way taking away an element of chance and being a little bit more in control. So I'm still kind of processing that. It's different.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about an essay that you've referred to by Janet Malcolm.
Oh, of course, yeah.
The 41 False Starts piece about David Sally. And I wanted to ask if there's literature you're particularly interested in, because the amazing thing about that piece is it's almost it's non-fiction as fiction. It has a strong relationship to, I think, painting. So it's a piece of writing that leaves visible the different attempts to write about the same thing. And it's easy to imagine So that's very much like your approach to painting. There must be a strong identification. It's very curious when, in say writing, something is achieved that has the effect of illuminating or making conscious something that is happening in a non-verbal way in painting. So when we see it in writing, there's a kind of aha, that is how the kind of thought process, or that is how something comes together in say painting. But it would be very difficult to describe that using words about painting. But then when somebody makes that clear in something like writing, we can point to that, and it's a very good example to indicate a particular approach to making painting where previous attempts are still, the means become the end, that the means end up being the piece. And so it's not a question of the painting is simply these are means, and then but we'll wait, and then there's the end. It's those moves that make the piece finally. Mm-hmm. And it's not even maybe complete then. It's a pause in the process. It's that's a complete painting, but there'll be another one, just as in her writing. That's just one example of her approach to writing. But how did you feel about reading that piece? It's extraordinary, isn't it?
It really is. It's kind of a true miracle, I feel like, in that it could never like happen before or happen again. In that, yeah, it's her genuine attempt to write this essay in about David Salle as she's kind of going to his studio and talking to him, and her writing 41 kind of like failed starts to the essay because she's struggling with him and struggling with the paintings, and so she's writing about painting, but it becomes so much like the way we paint. And for me, that essay is more of like a fantasy of how or like maybe a fantasy or an aspiration in that it would be so beautiful to be able to show every start to a painting, even though it's not finished. You know, it's for whatever reason, it's not ready to be put out there in the world. And even in these paintings in this show that are less worked than my previous one, these paintings are still so worked, and there's a little bit of a loss in in kind of like letting go of the energy of the first layer of paint. Yeah, so that essay is very much for me about like, it's so sad in a way how that essay can really only happen once, where you do see all of these like creative efforts that if she had just written a conventional essay and every other time, I mean, I shouldn't say that her other essays are conventional, but that in every other essay, it is a process of editing, and editing is so important, but you lose so much. You would have lost like 40 of those pieces if she'd written it more conventionally. So it's kind of just this little glimpse of, oh, if we could only see the beginnings.
Yeah, I think there's it can be devastating, the what's lost. I mean, even if the painting is works, it's a success. What has been lost is is part of what makes it a complete work, I think. It wouldn't be possible without that kind of destruction or the experience of letting go of different stages. I remember reading about Matisse having his paintings photographed, and he a couple of times exhibited the photographs of different stages of his paintings with the complete painting, because he had that sense of loss, that each stage had so much that he didn't want to destroy. But to get to the finished painting, those things were lost. Mm-hmm. So he wanted to exhibit photographs of what he was sad about letting go of. So it's part of the, it can be part of the process of a certain kind of making painting. It's more central, I would imagine, to your way of making than for a lot of artists.
Well, it's comforting to know that Matisse desired that so much as someone who definitely aspired to. And I do remember that show years ago now that showed a lot of his in progress paintings and how beautiful that was. Yeah, and I mean, and not to get too metaphorical about it, but it's like it's really it's about life. It's like, yeah, there's so much that we have to let go of. That's how we survive. We just have to keep going, even though we lose objects and lose people. Yeah, you just can't hold on to everything. So at the time when I was first read Janet Malcolm's essay, it was definitely a time when I was like, felt like so much effort and work and physical labor was going into each painting, that I was anxious about all the time I was losing, but comforted by the fact that eventually like the cracks and creases would show through the paintings, like the little kind of like glimpses into the first layers would come through. So that was something for me, that was always, you know, that the first layer was always important no matter what.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about your work in relation to somebody like Matt Connors, and thinking how his there's a playfulness in both your approaches to abstraction, but he seems more preoccupied with using the tropes of abstraction to kind of reinvent how those can be made or viewed, whereas your work seems much more focused on its relationship to an experience of life. So it's not dependent on that dialectic with other works of abstraction. It's abstract work, but almost by default, in the sense that it's not trying to make a point about post-painterly abstraction or minimalism. These are ways of making painting that are available and now much changed, and it's and there's a great deal in the painting that's to do with desire rather than to do with a lived experience, rather than a simple reinterpretation of shapes or colors. So I think that's it's something that was lost to abstraction with a lot of minimalist work. A lot of painting became formalistic in a sense that it was, the stress was too much on how its means can be the sole way of eliciting feeling, whereas the most successful abstraction, I think, is still based in the artist's desire. Even if it's unavailable to know, the content is very much determining the way the paintings feel. It gives them more, there's more at stake, even if it's not visible. It's, you know, these things matter in a different way. I think it's a turn in so-called abstraction that's very positive. I mean, I'm making a general statement, but I think it's important to acknowledge that that abstract painting incorporates a lot of content to do with the artist's experience. It's not a disembodied activity.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is very true. And I guess I have so many like mixed feelings about the struggle of making these paintings that I make. And you bring up Matt Connors, who I like love his paintings so much, and I'm so like envious of them in a way. I don't have no idea how he makes them. And
yeah, beautiful paintings.
Yeah, and there's a way at which like I feel like I could never make paintings that do there's a lightness and ease to them that I feel like I could never achieve, because I do have this struggle that's always so apparent. And I feel like I almost feel like there's a kind of, and anything can work. There's so many abstract painters who I admire, who, I mean, even going back to Blinky Palermo and like Raul de Kaiser, where it's like they could just take a brush and put it on the painting and
exactly.
put out their idea. I mean, this is how I am imagining it. I'm not sure if this is true, but that's so impossible to me. Like, I just truly don't understand that ease and how you create a painting that way. Just putting a brushstroke on a piece of linen without the struggle of building this whole kind of like system around it. So that's kind of my, you know, what I have in the studio to deal with, and it's fine, I guess. Sometimes I wish it were less work than all the work I create for myself.
Right. But I think the lightness in your work is that what would be labored or offered as labor intensive is kind of bypassed, because as you're describing, it's the necessary way of finding the painting in the end. So it's not like you're working away at craft of perfection. It has its own lightness and spontaneity that comes from the way in which you bring these things together. So it's just a different way of using a sensibility or an ability to respond or to find, to find that the materials and the color come together. It's, yeah, I would say.
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying. And it is like I've got so much in the studio, and I am spending a lot of time looking for the right moments that have happened. And I certainly know when, you know, or I shouldn't say I certainly know. I like to think I know when something needs to be thrown away, like when it is over labored and
yeah,
not gonna work.
Right. Well, Julia, I think we should open the conversation to questions, if you don't mind.
No, not at all.
Great talking with you, and
you too. Thank you for all the beautiful insights.
Thank you. Well, let's see what people are thinking about. See what they have to say.
Thank you both so much. I've been very excited this entire time, but I have a question, but I'm going to hold off for a moment. We are going to, I think, quite fittingly open our audience Q&A with a question from Julia. Julia, audience member, can unmute now. I've just passed you a mic. Yes, we can hear you.
The question I had, which was it was a practical question back in the conversation, which was that Julia is collaging on, she's taken her paintings off the stretcher, she stretched them, unstretched them, which was a very nice way of putting it, and discovering what she has by putting them on the wall and then adding in from stuff she has in the studio, and then thinking, I want to solidify this area because it's just what's needed now. And then I presume she has jaggedy edges from the additions and subtractions and painting, and then they need to go around a formal stretcher, I'm guessing. And it was just a dumb question really about gluing edges or something, how that then does that become part of the painting. You know, you have to get the damn thing around in the end, and you haven't really seen it in my experience until it is around the damn stretcher. And maybe that pisses you off sometimes, partly. It's a shame to have to put it around a stretcher sometimes, and just how whether you just add on stuff which makes a bump around the edges.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Well, I don't think that's a dumb question at all. It's basically my life.
Yeah, thought it might.
It is a big challenge because I kind of compose these things on the floor or on the wall, and then I need the stretchers to be substantial. So I'll order the exact like size down to the 1/8 of an inch from my stretcher bar maker, Ranger Penny, who's excellent, by the way. Like he'll build all of like the pieces of wood for me that I know I'll need to. Basically, I don't use glue at all. I've never had any luck with like glue or anything sticky. So everything is stapled. So yeah, if it can't like be stapled to a piece of the stretcher bar, then it's not going to happen. That's sort of every once in a while I get a panel so that the staples can go wherever they need to go. And it's really like, it's a lot of just pulling that linen as tight as it can go to have it be as seamless looking as possible. But that's why the edges are so, like, people pay a lot of attention to the edges, because sometimes it's like a very thick line of staples, and it's just kind of what's necessary to get that linen on there.
That's why you said every staple has a purpose.
Yeah.
It's there for a big reason. I get it now. Thank you. Great answer.
Thank you so much, Julia and Julia. Sorry, I had to. We are going to go next to a question from G.E. Schwartz. G.E., you've got the mic.
Oh, thank you so much, Ty and David and Julia. Can you talk, Julia, a bit about how you move beyond repetition and duplication, and in that process, developing along the way new techniques and works?
Yeah, that's a really big question. Okay. I guess it kind of, I don't want to repeat myself from what David and I talked about, but anything that starts to feel a little too like boring or too much of a duplication from what I was doing before, just kind of necessarily, I'll push it like through trying something unexpected in the studio. That's kind of where, say, like the big like column and box experiment came from. Like experiments to lead to kind of like gestures and situations that I haven't created through like my conscious fussy effort is what I'm always going for. So a lot of variation just comes in through that, and it's almost more about like choosing what's going to work, and even more importantly, choosing like what that is repetitive should be held on to, like what I shouldn't let go of, because I think that's really important too. Like even if it, you know, I've gone back to more simple monochromes in this show, which are like repetitive in a way from maybe like my first few shows, but that feels like just as essential to me.
Oh, I totally get that. Thank you so much.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much, G.E., for that question, and thank you, Julia, for your answer. I had a question myself in that I was, you know, you brought up 41 false starts, and I was all caps yelling in our Slack channel about how that essay completely runs my practice. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your relationship to writing, both in the sense of like the way you were talking about 41 false starts and how that influenced you, but also in your relationship to, I feel like I see a lot of similarities in the way that you talk about your practice and in the way that writers talk about theirs, especially in the beginning when you were talking about how your smaller pieces are often like a cropped edit of a larger piece. And I was thinking about the idea of like, you know, sometimes I'll be writing a longer piece and I'll find a sentence that I feel like I can work with, and then that becomes something new. And I think I hear about that from a lot of writers, and I'm wondering, yeah, your relationship to writing itself and to writing as practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love your question. It's like just questions that I think I ask myself all the time, and I'm kind of I'm obsessed with no like clear answer, the relationship between writing and painting, and thinking about editing as such like kind of like the most important thing there is to both practices. And I feel like when I try to write, it's fun and exciting because I don't know what I'm doing. And it allows for a lot of like a lack of preciousness and a lot of destroying things and editing in a way that like kind of almost inspires me in the studio. Like be more like this in your art studio where you're like letting yourself write pretty freely and letting yourself destroy the whole thing. But I'm more of just I'm more just like fascinated with the question, like without an answer, and fascinating with other people. And like I love talking to writers about their process, and reading. Like I, love so much of the autofiction stuff that a lot of people are tired of by now, but I just like love it all. Like I just love any kind of writing that allows some of the process in. Yeah.
Thank you. I was thinking about also like auto portrait when you're talking about like auto fiction that allows the process in. I feel like that's a piece that I think about a lot, but that's beside the point. I'm just excited. So thank you so much for taking the time to answer that. And now we'll go to our closing question from the Rail's very own Fong Bui. Fong, you've got the mic.
What? Is there more questions? There gotta be more. Julia, David, it's a delightful conversation. I learned so much, and one thing that I could help but to think about the two concepts of space and your sculpture impulse, Julia. In space, in this regard, because responding to what David talked earlier, not to surrender easily to formalistic framework or any kind of, I would say, aesthetic seduction, so to speak. Because there are such seductions, can be very powerful. But the idea of, whenever the problem is in life to be solved, it's not so much life is not a problem to be solved, so to speak, but it's a reality. But it's a reality to be experienced, that it seems to be in the process of making, and allow to that spatial variation to occur. And I think the fact that you treat them differently every time to every undertaking, every work. I can't help but to think about how animals, sometimes animals urinate, they don't, isn't that silly? But I'm thinking of it, just came automatically. Animals urinate as a social function, young, just to expulsion of their waste material, really. They urinate because for both reasons. Number one is a way to mark territory. Number two is to express a certain kind of subversiveness, And I just felt like the way that you fold, you demarcate, you track in a certain kind of formation, given the fact that they are rectilinear relationship. It doesn't matter. It seemed to be tied into that whole sculpture impulse, David. So it's like it have a strong desire to amplify a certain three-dimensionality, but you can't help to desire a flattening of space. So it's very interesting contradiction, which brings me to a very question that I like to ask. I know that you worked for Bob Goldberg as an assistant for a while, beginning.
No, I didn't work for Bob. I worked for Donald Moffat, his partner.
Oh, no. Yes, a sculpture, right?
Yeah, it was, and which is funny. It's a funny, a meaningful slip, because Donald also, like, in a very sculptural way, was always pushing things back into painting, into the I mean, Donald does make sculptures that are freestanding, but so often his sculptural ideas and work would go back to the relief for three-dimensional, but on the wall, stretched around a stretcher bar.
So it's a very simple question, Julia. Did you guys have any kind of dialogue about the relationship between the two, or just through the making that you absorb and then have internalized in your own memory of being there working as an assistant?
Oh, I mean, I think working for Donald was hugely influential. For a long stretch of working for him, I was stretching and unstretching these raw linens on stretcher bars, not for the sake of shifting anything around like I do, but just for the sake of getting these kind of upholstery like pieces of linen in the exact right place. And so I would spend full days stretching linen. And I do think that like I moved in a totally different direction after stopping working from him and wasn't doing that kind of work, but I do think returning to that kind of like muscle memory of like stretching linen is the work of making a painting. It's not just the preparatory work, or the fact that it is the preparatory work is all the more like significant for it being the work, because it's kind of like, you know, like you said, like the dog's urinating, it's kind of like doing the thing without you know, too much consciousness about it. So that in a large part probably did come from that day-to-day repetitive stretching linen for Donald.
Well, I mean, it's I don't know, David. I mean, it's very Cezannian in a way, no? Who trying to make I mean, who trying to revive the three-dimensional old master painting physicality, but he also have a great appeal to flatten out the whole entire space as equal distribution. But anyway, it's just terrific. I can't wait to see the show.
Okay.
So congrats, you guys. Congrats, Julia. And back to you, Tiger.
Thank you so much, Fong. And thank you again so much, Julia and David, and all of you for tuning in. This has been so lovely. And now, here at the Rail, we have a tradition of closing all of our events with a poetry reading. And today I'm thrilled to welcome our Poet Laureate of the Day, Ellie Parker, to the stage. Artist Ellie Parker is based in Brooklyn. Her work is transdisciplinary by nature, harmonizing text, photography, and the moving image. Passionate about communal practice, she has worked as a media instructor at nonprofit organizations such as the Echo Park Film Center and Mono Noah Ware. 2 of her poems were recently published in Dirt Child's Volume 3, and she is currently writing her forthcoming chapbook, The Days We Dawn, while studying poetry at the Poetry Field School and Cool Memories. Ellie, please take it away.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, and lovely to hear you talk about your work, Julia. And thanks to Ben Fama for connecting us. I have 3 poems, and this first one is called Stand Still. There is nothing we need to know about God. I am already familiar with fruit rot. There is no touch holy enough to close the gap where the ocean destroys its own rhythm. Necklines falling recklessly. Now tell me how slowly you'd like me to dig. A softer life, diffused warmth to deceive the body of its expiry. Easy brawlessness, blurring the violent transition between sleep and the sun, your slip. This next piece is called The Sun Sets Around 6 p.m. in October. Allow my eyes the light they need to take off your dress, the contour of a sunflower. You loosen my legs, words assemble to try on meaning. You ask if the dress would fit me. I estimate perfectly. Clothesline swaying skyward. You ask, must leaves turn? The ease of a zipper inspires me to be gentle. Yellow linen grazing the sill. If only death was consensual, would we have time for questions? And this last piece is called I Can Make Love to Anyone When My Eyes Are Closed. Light strikes my body, I curve and I form. For my love, as of now, love me for my love, emerge from all the bedrooms of the world, a better woman. This and that could be anywhere. Freedom is a superior hell. How I hover above my God's God for a bird's eye view of your breasts, concentric perfection, to feel myself at sunset in yellow. For my love, as of now, love me for my clouds, opening my body into decipherable shapes. Providential fucking, the fuck above fucking, hurling to the ground. For my love, as of now, love me to expel the damage, bending centuries, my body over centuries, waiting for night to make me a better woman. You and me at sunset, looking more beautiful than we ever will. My year-long kissing, arrivals of distillation, teeth chipping against each other, cold hands in a lover's coat, futures trapped in the future, how my moth wants and wants desire is without destination. Words to make me pure and all the yellows of the world, our gods making love disintegrate to shape, you and me at dawn covered in snow. I endure a body in the shape of a woman. Free me from time, for time cannot move freely, knowing I'll never know. The dark dazzles with absence, a few more minutes of sleep. Now, my love, tell me you are ready. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellie, for sharing your work with us today. That was completely incredible. And thank you again, Julia and David, for what a lovely conversation. We'd also like to thank Michael and Gabrielle from Bureau for helping make today's event possible. We encourage everyone to view our archive of these conversations on our YouTube channel, where we will upload today's conversation shortly. And we here at the Rail do this every day, so please join us again tomorrow at 1 p.m. for our 71st Radical Poetry Reading, curated by Gabriel Dozal, featuring poetry read by Aldo Amparan, Anselm Berrigan, Gabriel Palacios, and Lee Stein. And now you may all turn on your microphones to say hello and goodbye as you leave.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Terrific.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Ellie.
Bye-bye, thank you.
David.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations on the show. And thank you for the reading, buddy. Thank you so much for the beautiful reading. Yeah, go see the show, okay, guys.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Bye.
Go see the
Isn't
show
it
and read
the
41 false starts
Raw
on the
headquarter. Ciao. Let's go some lunch.
Congratulations.
Congratulations,
Julia.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye now.
Thank you, Fong.
Bye, Aaron. Bye, you guys.
Bye. See you
Victoria.
later,
You're the
Julia.
tiger.
Bye, Ingrid.
I didn't know you
Bye,
were here.
I know. It's becoming
I
that.
wasn't.
I saw the name join.
Yeah,
Oh,
we all came in eventually.
That's right. I think your brother's here too, Julia.
My dad was here.
Your dad?
Kathleen
Oh,
was here.
really? I didn't know.
Kathleen was here, but under a fake name, and Matt was here.
That's cool.
All right, I'll
Go
see
see
you
the
later.
show.
Thank you all.
Take
Okay.
care. Be safe, everyone.
I'll see you all soon, I
Take
hope.
care. Thank you.
Thank you so
Goodbye.
much, Ty, for your help in coordinating this. It was so easy and seamless.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you.
Tiger is awesome. Congrats, Julia, and go see the show, you guys. Okay.
Yeah,
Maybe-
we're on our way already.
I text you, Julia.
Okay, sounds good. All right, I'll see you all
Everyone.
later. I'm gonna leave now. Okay, bye.